When you think of zakat, what's the first thing that pops into your head? For most of us, it's that mandatory 2.5% religious tax, right? It's a fundamental pillar of Islamic finance. But what if the Quran itself, when you look at it directly, isn't really talking about a tax at all? What if it's describing a mindset, a completely different way of seeing our wealth?
So let's just dive right into that question. The source material for this explainer suggests that to find the real answer, we kind of have to hit pause on later traditions for a minute and just focus purely on the Quranic text. And what we find there, well, it might actually surprise you. First things first, let's just quickly go over the familiar formula. This is the system most people know. It's a very detailed, almost mechanical process, you know? You've got specific percentages, these wealth thresholds called nisab, a whole system for who gets the money. Honestly, it's so complex, you often need an expert just to figure it all out. Let's just call this our starting point. Okay, now let's completely reframe this whole conversation. We're going to go all the way back to the foundational ideas about wealth that are actually in the Quran. Because before we can even talk about how to give, we first have to understand what it is we're even giving from. The first huge concept we need to get our heads around is rizq, which means divine provision. See, in the Quran, wealth isn't described as something you own. It's presented as a trust that you're just looking after, like a steward. The text even uses the term mustakhalafina, which means temporary trustees. And that one idea, it changes everything. If you're not the owner, your entire relationship with money has to shift. Second, wealth is called a fitna. Now that word can sound intense, but it just means a trial or a test. So wealth isn't inherently good or bad, it's more like a proving ground. And what's it testing? According to the source, it's testing our priorities, how attached we get to things, and just how aware we are of the people around us who might be struggling. And this brings us to a really crucial point. The Quran talks about a haqq ma'lum, a recognized or inherent right that exists within wealth for those in need. Think about that. This isn't a tax that's put on wealth from the outside. It's a right that is part of the wealth itself. It's like social responsibility is baked right into the DNA of prosperity. So with that foundation set, let's look at those key terms that often get treated like separate legal rules: infaq, sadaqah, and zakah. The argument from our source is that these aren't different laws at all. They're just different ways of describing one single unified idea of conscious giving. And this slide just lays it out perfectly. Think of it like one single process that has three parts. First, there's the action itself, infaq, which just means circulating your wealth, not hoarding it. Then there's the quality of that action, sadaqah, meaning it's got to come from a place of sincerity and truth. And finally, you have the outcome, zakah, which is the purification and growth that happens because of that sincere action. And check this out. Here is the verse from the source that literally ties it all together. Notice what it says. Take a sadaqah, that's the sincere act, in order to cause tazkiyah, or purification. That word for purification, tazakihim, shares the exact same root as zakah. The verse itself connects the sincere act directly to the purifying result. So here's the big aha moment. The source material is basically saying that sadaqah and zakah are not separate legal buckets, like voluntary versus mandatory charity. No, instead, they're descriptive. Sadaqah describes the quality of your giving, its sincerity, and zakah describes the result of that giving, the purification and growth that happens for you and for society. Okay, so you're probably thinking, all right, if it's not a fixed 2.5%, then how much should I give? And that question leads us away from rigid calculation and toward a model that's all about consciousness. And believe it or not, the Quran gives a very direct answer. When the question is asked, what should we spend? The response isn't a percentage, it's a principle. Al-af. That word means the surplus, or what's left over beyond your genuine needs. This totally shifts the focus from an external math formula to an internal, conscious look at your own life. You can really see the two models crystal clear when you put them side by side like this. The calculation model asks a math question. What is 2.5%? But the consciousness model asks a deeply personal, reflective question. What is my genuine surplus? One is an annual task you check off a list. The other is a constant, ongoing state of awareness. So what we're left with are two fundamentally different frameworks, two totally different systems. One is based on later traditions, and the other, as the source material argues, is based purely on the principles you find in the Quranic text itself. This table just lays it all out. On one hand, you've got the Quranic model, which provides broad principles, like give from your surplus, and its whole focus is on your internal state of mind. Its terms are descriptive, and it's something anyone can access directly. But on the other hand, the traditional model added all these specific calculations, and the focus shifted to external compliance. It created these rigid legal categories that require experts to interpret, arguably turning what was universal guidance into more of a specific religious identity mark.
And so this explainer doesn't really end with a simple answer. Instead, it ends with a question for you to really think about. The source presents this compelling case for a whole new way of thinking about our wealth and our responsibilities. So the question is this: if we were to actually view our wealth not as a personal possession to be taxed, but as a divine trust to be consciously circulated, how would that single shift in perspective change our financial decisions, our generosity, and our connection to the world around us every single day?